There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They don't announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. They slip in quietly, wearing the clothes of a Tuesday night, or the sound of rain against a window pane. You only recognize their weight in retrospect, when you trace the timeline of your own heart and find the exact hairline fracture where everything changed. For me, that moment had a name, and he was asleep on my couch, his head resting in my lap, oblivious to the fact that he was dismantling my world, breath by quiet breath. His name was Julian, and the ordinary Tuesday he had chosen for this demolition was a masterpiece of unassuming destruction. He was a continent of warmth in the cool, still air of my living room. The weight of his head on my thigh was both a comfort and an agony, an anchor pinning me to a reality I had spent years carefully avoiding. I was a photographer, a professional observer, trained to capture moments without becoming part of them, to frame the world through a lens that kept it at a safe and manageable distance. But there was no lens for this, no f-stop that could soften the edges of the truth pressing into me. Julian, my teammate, my best friend, the brightest and loudest star in my quiet galaxy, was here, in my space, tangled in the fabric of my life in a way that felt terrifyingly permanent. His breathing was a slow, rhythmic tide, a sound I knew as well as the click of my own camera shutter, yet tonight it felt different. It was the sound of a boundary dissolving. His hair, still faintly damp from a post-practice shower, smelled of the cheap mint shampoo he always used, a scent that was so intrinsically him that it felt like a direct line to my own undoing. I could count the individual strands catching the dim light from the street lamp outside my window, a constellation of dark gold against the worn denim of my jeans. My hand hovered in the air above his head, a satellite caught in a gravitational pull it couldn't escape. I wanted, more than anything, to let it fall, to thread my fingers through his hair, to feel the living warmth of him. But I was frozen, trapped in the amber of the moment, terrified that the slightest movement would shatter the fragile peace. He had arrived 2 hours earlier, a whirlwind of restless energy, claiming he couldn't stand the oppressive silence of his own apartment. This had become a common occurrence, a new pattern woven into the tapestry of our friendship since his breakup with Sarah a few months ago. He would appear at my door, a six-pack of beer in one hand and a universe of unspoken anxieties in his eyes, and we would settle onto this couch, the television a flickering, silent third party to our conversations. He would talk about his job, the frustrating labyrinth of software consulting that seemed to drain the light from him. He would talk about the team, about practice, about the familiar aches and triumphs of the game that had bound us together. He rarely spoke of Sarah, but her ghost was always there, a subtle pressure drop in the room. I would listen, a faithful lighthouse keeper tending to his beacon, offering quiet nods and the occasional question, making sure he knew he wasn't navigating the storm alone. Tonight, however, the words had run out sooner than usual. He had trailed off mid-sentence, his gaze fixed on the dancing pixels of the muted screen, and a profound weariness had settled over his features, pulling at the corners of his eyes and mouth. He had shifted, turning on his side, and without preamble or permission, laid his head in my lap. And then, he had simply fallen asleep. It was an act of such casual, thoughtless intimacy that it stole the air from my lungs. This was Julian's way. He moved through the world with an unthinking grace, a physical confidence that I, in my quiet, observant shell, could only marvel at. He was a creature of touch and proximity, slinging an arm over your shoulder, leaning into your space, ruffling your hair. For years, I had been a recipient of this casual affection, and I had learned to metabolize it, to file it away under the category of friendship, but this was different. This wasn't a fleeting touch in a crowded locker room or a celebratory hug on the field. This was quiet, sustained, and deeply vulnerable. It was an offering, a surrender, and it was a problem, because for me, none of it was casual. Every brush of his hand, every shared glance across a crowded room, was a secret I had to keep, a feeling I had to swallow down until it became a hard, dense knot in my chest. Loving Julian from a distance was a manageable ache, a low-grade fever I had learned to live with. Loving him like this, with the physical proof of his trust so undeniably present, felt like a hemorrhage. I was bleeding out, right here on my worn-out gray couch, and he was dreaming, completely unaware. My hand finally completed its descent, my fingers brushing against his temple with the delicacy of a bomb disposal expert. His skin was warm. He didn't stir. He just sighed, a soft exhalation that seemed to sink him deeper into sleep, deeper into me. And in the silent, echoing space of my apartment, a single, terrifying thought took root. This could not go on. But I knew, with a certainty that was as painful as it was absolute, that I would do nothing to stop it. We had met on a sun-scorched August afternoon 5 years ago, on the first day of preseason soccer tryouts for the university team. I was a nervous freshman, clutching my goalie gloves like a holy relic, feeling utterly out of place among the boisterous, confident upperclassmen. I had always been more comfortable in the solitary world of my darkroom, watching images slowly emerge from a chemical bath, a quiet magic I could control. The soccer field was a different kind of alchemy, chaotic and unpredictable. I found my solace in the lonely geometry of the goal, the 1,600 square feet of turf that was my responsibility alone. From my vantage point, I could see everything. I was the observer, the last line of defense, a role that suited my temperament. I watched the other players, their movements, their tells, the subtle shifts in their posture that betrayed their intentions. And then I saw him. Julian was a blur of motion and kinetic joy, a forward with an explosive speed that seemed to defy the oppressive humidity. He was all sharp angles and fluid grace, his laughter carrying easily across the field, a bright, infectious sound. He played with a kind of reckless abandon, a pure, unadulterated love for the game that was mesmerizing to watch. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets caught in his orbit. Our friendship didn't begin with a grand gesture, but with a series of small, accumulated moments, like stones worn smooth by a river. It started with him being the last one to leave practice, taking shot after shot on goal while I stayed, happy for the extra work. He would thank me, clapping me on the shoulder with a grin that could have powered a small city. "You're a wall, Leo," he'd say, and the casual praise would warm me for hours. It grew in the locker room, where his locker ended up next to mine by some stroke of alphabetical fate. He would fill the space with his endless chatter, his terrible taste in music, and the scent of that mint shampoo. He learned about my photography, his initial curiosity blossoming into genuine interest. He'd peer over my shoulder at the contact sheets I'd bring to class, asking questions about light and composition with an attentiveness that surprised me. I, in turn, learned the intricate map of his life, his ridiculously close-knit family in Oregon, his inexplicable love for pineapple on pizza, his long-term, long-distance relationship with his high school girlfriend, Sarah. Her name was a constant presence, a fact of his life as solid and unchangeable as his position on the field. It was the wall around the garden, the sign that clearly read, "No trespassing," and I respected it. I had to. I can pinpoint the exact moment the foundation of our friendship shifted for me, the day the ground beneath my feet became unstable. It was sophomore year, during a crucial away game. The air was cold, the sky a bruised purple, and a relentless, miserable drizzle had been falling for hours. We were tied 1-1 in the final minutes of overtime. The other team was on a breakaway, a 2-on-1 rush that left our defenders scrambling. The striker took a shot, a low, hard drive aimed at the far corner. I dove, stretching every inch of my body, my gloved fingers just managing to deflect the ball. It spun wildly, hitting the inside of the post with a sickening thud. The rebound came straight out, a perfect, terrible gift for the forward who was crashing the net. I was on the ground, tangled in my own limbs, completely exposed. There was nothing I could do but watch the inevitable happen. But then, from out of nowhere, Julian appeared. He had sprinted the length of the field, a desperate, lung-burning run, and he threw his body in front of the shot. The ball cannonied into his chest with a sound that was audible even over the roar of the sparse crowd. He crumpled to the ground, the wind knocked out of him. But he had saved the goal. He had saved me. The whistle blew moments later, ending the game in a draw. While the rest of the team trudged off the field, I ran to him. He was still on his knees, gasping for air, mud smeared across his face. I knelt in front of him, my heart hammering against my ribs with a force that had nothing to do with the game. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He looked up, and his eyes, clear and startlingly blue even in the dreary light, found mine. He broke into a weak, breathtaking grin. "Had to be done," he gasped. "Couldn't let them get one past my keeper." And in that moment, something inside me broke open. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a profound, overwhelming wave of something else, something fierce and protective and terrifyingly tender. It was the realization that I would have thrown myself in front of a bus for him. It was the realization that the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart had been obliterated by one selfless, reckless act on a muddy soccer field. I helped him to his feet, his arms slung over my shoulder, his weight leaning heavily against me. All the way back to the locker room, I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us, the warmth of his body seeping through my damp jersey, the feel of his pulse against my neck. It was the beginning of my secret, a secret I would guard for years, nurturing it in the quiet, dark room of my soul, watching it develop into something vivid and beautiful and hopelessly untouchable. That secret became the lens through which I viewed our entire relationship. Our easy camaraderie, the late-night study sessions fueled by cheap coffee, the road trips to away games with the team, the shared apartments over the summers. It was all colored by this hidden truth. I became an expert in interpretation, a scholar of his casual gestures. A playful punch on the arm was a simple greeting, but I would feel the ghost of it for an hour. A shared look of understanding across a crowded party was just a moment of connection between friends. But for me, it was a lifeline. I learned to live in the space between what was and what I wished could be. I watched him with Sarah, the easy intimacy they shared during her visits, the way he would talk to her on the phone, his voice softening. And with each observation, I reinforced the boundaries. He was my friend, my best friend, and that was a gift I couldn't bear to risk. To want more was to be greedy, to risk shattering something beautiful and essential in its own right. So I stayed quiet. I became the keeper of his stories, the steady presence in his life, the friend he could always count on. And I buried my own feelings so deep that I sometimes managed to convince myself they weren't even there. But they were always there, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my life, a current that always pulled me toward him. The shift began subtly, as most seismic changes do. It started not with a tremor, but with a change in the atmospheric pressure between us. Julian and Sarah broke up in the spring of our final year of college. It was an amicable, sad parting of ways, the kind of breakup that happens when two people realize they have grown into adults who want different lives in different cities. There was no drama, no shouting, just a quiet, painful acceptance. Julian was stoic about it, presenting a brave face to the team and our friends. But I could see the cracks in the facade. I saw it in the way he stared into space when he thought no one was looking, in the forced brightness of his laughter, in the new restlessness that clung to him like a second skin. He had always been a creature of motion, but now his energy had a frantic, ungrounded quality. He started spending more and more time at my place. My apartment, small and cluttered with photography equipment and books, became his sanctuary. It was quieter than the house he shared with 3 other teammates, a place where he could simply be. His presence began to reshape the geography of my life. A toothbrush appeared in my bathroom mug, a silent, unassuming immigrant. A pair of his running shoes took up permanent residence by my front door. His favorite brand of cereal materialized in my cupboard. These were small incursions, tiny flags planted in the soil of my solitude, and each one felt both wonderful and deeply dangerous. He was weaving himself into the very fabric of my daily existence, and I was powerless to stop it. I was, in fact, an active conspirator, making sure I had his preferred coffee on hand, leaving the spare key in the same spot under the loose brick by the steps. I told myself it was what any good friend would do. He was hurting, and I was his safe harbor. It was a simple, noble narrative, and I clung to it like a life raft. But in the quiet hours of the night, after he had gone, I would trace the outline of these small changes and acknowledge the truth. My carefully maintained distance was eroding. The tide was coming in, and I was in danger of drowning. The excuse, the catalyst that moved him from a frequent visitor to a semi-permanent resident, came in the form of a job. After graduation, I had found a small studio space downtown and was slowly, painstakingly building a freelance photography business. My life had a quiet, self-contained rhythm. Julian, on the other hand, had taken a consulting job that promised good money in a fast-paced environment, but delivered mostly soul-crushing hours and a 2-hour round-trip commute. He started staying over on weeknights, initially under the guise of crashing to beat the morning traffic. It made a practical kind of sense. My apartment was a convenient halfway point between his office and the suburban wasteland where he lived. The first time it happened, he took the couch, balling up his jacket as a makeshift pillow. The second time, I offered him a spare blanket and a pillow from my own bed. By the third time, I found myself saying the words I had both longed for and dreaded. "You know, the couch is terrible," I said, trying to sound casual, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "My bed's a queen. There's plenty of room if you want. It's better than waking up with your back seizing." I held my breath, the words hanging in the air between us like a cloud of spores, capable of seeding something new or simply dispersing into nothing. Julian looked at me, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "You sure, man? I don't want to impose, it's fine," I said, my voice a little too quick, a little too eager. "Seriously, it's just a bed." It was, of course, not just a bed. It was a continent, a universe, a sacred and terrifying space. And with a grateful, weary nod, he crossed the border. That night marked the beginning of the ritual. The couch was abandoned, and my bed became a shared territory. We established a silent, unspoken treaty. He would take the right side, I would take the left. We would sleep on our respective edges of the mattress, a wide, demilitarized zone of empty space between us, our backs turned to each other in a gesture of mutual, platonic respect. It was an arrangement fraught with a kind of exquisite torture for me. To be so close to him, to hear the soft sound of his breathing in the darkness, to feel the subtle shift of the mattress when he turned over in his sleep, it was almost more than I could bear. My body was on high alert, every nerve ending firing. I would lie awake for hours, rigid and still, my heart pounding a frantic, silent rhythm against my ribs. I was terrified of falling asleep, terrified I might turn over, that an arm or a leg might betray me in the night and cross the invisible line we had drawn. The ritual evolved. It became an expected part of our week. Tuesdays and Thursdays became Julian nights. He would arrive late, shed his corporate skin, and we would fall into our comfortable pattern of quiet conversation and shared silence. The pretense of the commute slowly faded away, replaced by an unspoken acknowledgement of a deeper need. He wasn't just staying over for convenience. He was staying over for comfort. He was lonely, and my quiet presence was the antidote. I understood this, and it was this understanding that allowed me to endure the nightly torment. I was helping him. I was being a good friend. This was the mantra I repeated to myself as I lay in the dark, smelling the faint scent of his shampoo on the pillow next to mine. But the line between friendship and something else was becoming increasingly blurred, like a photograph slowly losing its focus. One night, the unspoken rules of our arrangement were broken. A thunderstorm had descended on the city, a violent, percussive assault of wind and rain. The power had flickered and died, plunging my apartment into a profound darkness, broken only by the intermittent, ghostly flashes of lightning. Julian had always hated thunderstorms, a fact he admitted with a sheepish, self-deprecating laugh. As the storm raged outside, I could feel the tension radiating from his side of the bed. He was restless, turning over and over, the sheets rustling with his anxiety. Then, in the brief, silent space between a clap of thunder and the next, I felt it. A hesitant touch against my back. His hand. It rested there for a moment, uncertain, before his entire body shifted, moving across the demilitarized zone. He pressed his front against my back, his arm wrapping around my waist, his face burying itself in the space between my shoulder blades. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle locked. I stopped breathing. Time itself seemed to slow down, stretching out into an infinite, terrifying moment. His breath was warm against my neck. His heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my back, a counterpoint to the storm outside. I could feel the fine hairs on his arm against my stomach, the solid weight of his leg tucked behind mine. It was an act of pure, instinctual comfort-seeking, a child seeking refuge from a storm. I knew that. My rational mind understood that this was about his fear, not about me. But my body, my heart, they didn't care about reason. They only understood the language of his touch, the undeniable reality of his closeness. He was holding me. He had crossed the line. He had closed the distance. And I was completely, utterly lost. I lay there, a statue carved from fear and longing, and listened to the storm inside me rage in perfect sync with the one outside. After what felt like an eternity, his breathing deepened, his body relaxing against mine as he finally succumbed to sleep. The storm had passed, both outside and in him. But for me, the rain was just beginning. That night became a new touchstone, a new secret. We never spoke of it. The next morning, he was up before me, the coffee already made, his demeanor as bright and untroubled as the post-storm sky. It was as if it had never happened. But the boundary had been breached. The demilitarized zone was gone. More often than not, I would wake up in the middle of the night to find him pressed against me, or I would wake in the morning with his arm thrown across my chest, his head on my shoulder. He was a tactile sleeper, drawn to warmth and presence, and I had become his anchor in the dark. I learned to sleep through it, or rather, I learned to exist in a state of semi-wakefulness, hyper-aware of his proximity, but able to find a strange sort of peace in it. This was our new normal, a quiet, unspoken intimacy that existed only in the hours between midnight and dawn. During the day, we were Leo and Julian, teammates, best friends. We went to practice, we hung out with our friends, we lived our separate lives. But at night, in the sanctuary of my bedroom, we were something else entirely. Something undefined and fragile and achingly beautiful. The door to my bedroom became a powerful symbol for me. When Julian first started staying over, I would close it firmly, creating a clear and defined boundary between the sleeping space and the rest of the apartment. It was a signal, to myself more than to him, that this was a temporary, platonic arrangement. But as the ritual became more ingrained, I found myself leaving it slightly ajar. It was a subconscious shift, a small crack in my own defenses. Then, Julian began to do it himself. If he went to bed before I did, I would come into the room to find the door not closed, but left open just an inch or two. It was a sliver of light, a silent invitation. It said, "I'm here. The space is open. You are welcome." I would obsess over that sliver of light. It felt like a confession, a question, a statement of trust so profound it made my chest ache. The open door was a metaphor for what was happening between us. We were leaving the door to our friendship open just enough for something else to slip through, something we were both too afraid to name. It was in this space of ambiguity, this world of open doors and shared beds and unspoken touches, that I lived, suspended between hope and fear, waiting for a signal that would tell me which way to go. The signal, when it finally came, was not a lightning strike but a quiet shift in the weather. It was a Thursday night in late autumn. The air had turned crisp, and the leaves outside my window were a riot of gold and crimson. Julian had been quiet all evening, a thoughtful, melancholic mood clinging to him that was unusual. He had lost a major client at work, a setback that had clearly shaken his confidence. He hadn't talked about it much, but I could feel the weight of his disappointment filling the small spaces in our conversation. We went to bed early, the silence in the room feeling heavier than usual. We lay in our usual positions, back to back, the space between us feeling like a chasm. I could feel his restlessness, the tension in his shoulders. I was pretending to be asleep, a coward's retreat, when I heard him whisper my name into the darkness. Leo. My heart stuttered. His voice was small, tentative. I waited a moment before answering, trying to make my own voice sound thick with sleep. Yeah. Are you awake? Kinda. What's up? I said, still facing away from him. There was a long pause. I could hear the soft sound of the sheets as he shifted. I don't know, he said, his voice barely audible. Just. Today sucked. This was my cue. This was the role I was meant to play. The steady friend, the supportive listener. I turned over to face him. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I could just make out the shape of him, a dark silhouette against the pale wall. He had turned to face me as well. We were lying on our sides, inches apart, the unspoken treaty of our sleeping arrangement momentarily suspended. I'm sorry, I said softly. Want to talk about it? He shook his head, a small, barely perceptible movement. Not really. Tired of talking about it. Tired of thinking about it. Another silence settled between us, but this one felt different. It wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with everything we had left unsaid for months, for years. I could feel the pull of him, the magnetic force that had always existed between us, now amplified by the darkness and the proximity. My hand, which was resting on the pillow between us, felt impossibly heavy. I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch his face, to offer a comfort that went beyond words. But I stayed perfectly still, my own fear a paralyzing force. It was Julian who broke the stillness. His voice, when he spoke again, was a whisper, so quiet I felt it more than heard it. Can I ask you something weird? The air in my lungs turned to ice. Okay, I breathed. He didn't say anything for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on me in the dark, searching, questioning. I held his gaze, my own heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The world seemed to shrink until it was nothing more than this bed, this darkness, this space between our faces. Would it be okay, he began, his voice trembling slightly, if I kissed you? And there it was. The question, the one I had both dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. It was not a demand. It was not a confident move. It was a plea. It was a raw, vulnerable offering of his own confusion and need, laid bare in the darkness. It was the ultimate act of trust. And in that moment, all my fear, all my carefully constructed walls, all my years of silent longing, they all just dissolved. There was no room for analysis, no space for doubt. There was only him, and the beautiful, terrifying honesty of his question. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. I simply closed the remaining distance between us. His lips were soft, hesitant, questioning. It wasn't a passionate kiss, not in the way you see in movies. It was something far more profound. It was a conversation. It was a confession. It was the sound of a door, left ajar for so long, finally, gently, clicking shut. It was a kiss that tasted of mint and melancholy and the stunning, terrifying relief of coming home. I brought my hand up, the one that had hovered over his hair all those months ago, and cupped the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in the familiar softness. He sighed into the kiss, a sound of surrender, and the tension that he had been carrying all night, all week, seemed to melt out of him. When we finally broke apart, we didn't speak. We just stayed there, our foreheads resting against each other, our breath mingling in the small space between us. He had crossed the line, but he had invited me to cross it with him. And together, in the quiet darkness, we had stepped into a new and uncharted territory. The aftermath was not the explosion of clarity I might have hoped for. It was, instead, a quiet, bewildering fog. The morning after the kiss was a study in excruciating awkwardness. Julian woke up first, slipping out of bed with a stealth I hadn't known he possessed. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, he was already dressed, his keys in his hand, a wall of strained nonchalance erected around him. He couldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something about an early meeting, a project deadline, a series of flimsy excuses that were a clear betrayal of the intimacy we had shared just hours before. He poured a coffee into a travel mug, his movements jerky and uncertain. The easy, physical grace that defined him was gone, replaced by a clumsy anxiety. Hey, I said, my voice rough with sleep and apprehension. "Morning," he replied, his back still to me. He finally turned, but his gaze darted around the room, landing on everything but me. "Gotta run. I'll, I'll text you later," and then he was gone. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. I was left standing in the middle of my kitchen, the ghost of his kiss still on my lips, a cold, heavy dread settling in my stomach. I had misinterpreted everything. That was the only logical conclusion. The kiss hadn't been a confession. It had been an anomaly, a moment of weakness and confusion born out of stress and a thunderstorm of emotion. He was regretting it. He was running from it. And in his haste, he was running from me. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in the darkness of the previous night withered under the harsh, unforgiving light of morning. The next few days were a special kind of hell. His text never came. He didn't show up at my apartment after work. He was a ghost at practice, arriving just in time to warm up and leaving the second it was over, avoiding the locker room chatter, avoiding me. He moved around me with a wide, deliberate berth, his eyes always fixed on some distant point over my shoulder. The vibrant, open channel of communication that had always existed between us was now filled with a crackling, painful static. Our teammates noticed the shift. I caught their questioning glances, the subtle looks exchanged when they thought we weren't watching. The silence from Julian was deafening. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered me, making it hard to breathe. Each unanswered call, each ignored text, was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of whatever it was we had shared. My hope curdled into a bitter mix of hurt and anger. How could he do this? How could he open that door, invite me in, and then slam it shut in my face without a single word of explanation? I let it go on for a week. A week of sleeping alone in the center of my bed, the empty space beside me feeling like a wound. A week of checking my phone with a pathetic, Pavlovian desperation. A week of replaying the kiss in my mind, analyzing it from every angle, torturing myself with the memory. I was a photographer, and I was trying to develop a picture that was hopelessly overexposed, trying to find meaning in a blinding white light of confusion. By the following Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. The anxiety had gnawed away at my patience, leaving only a raw, determined nerve. I was done waiting. I was done being a passive observer in the wreckage of my own life. After practice, as he made his usual beeline for the exit, I stepped into his path, blocking his escape. "Julian," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "We need to talk." He froze, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. For the first time in a week, he met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't anger or annoyance. It was fear, pure, unadulterated panic. "Leo, I can't right now. I'm late for." "No." I cut him off, my voice dropping lower. "No more excuses. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking for. You owe me that much." The fight seemed to drain out of him. He deflated, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He gave a short, jerky nod and followed me out to my car in the near-empty parking lot. We sat in the front seats, the engine off, the silence between us thick and suffocating. I didn't know where to start. All the angry, rehearsed speeches I had prepared in my head evaporated, leaving only the raw, simple hurt. Finally, I turned to him. "What happened?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Why are you avoiding me?" He stared straight ahead, his hands clenched into tight fists on his lap. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I've been a total ass. I don't care about that," I said, my frustration rising. "I just want to understand. That night, did it mean anything to you? Or was I just convenient?" He flinched as if I had struck him. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. The sight of it broke my anger, leaving only a deep, aching sadness. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "God, no, Leo. It wasn't. You weren't convenient." He took a deep, shuddering breath. I freaked out. I'm still freaking out." He looked down at his hands, his thumbs tracing frantic circles on his knuckles. I don't think about guys that way. I never have. With Sarah, it was easy. It was what was supposed to happen. It was the path everyone was on. And then she was gone, and I was. adrift. And you were there. You've always been there. My anchor. My best friend. He looked up at me again, his expression a mask of raw confusion. And somewhere along the way, the lines got blurry. I started needing you in a way I couldn't understand. I'd lie in your bed at night, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to be closer to you. It terrified me. I kept telling myself it was just friendship, that I was just lonely. He let out a short, humorless laugh. But that night, when I asked if I could kiss you, that wasn't friendship. I knew it wasn't. And when you kissed me back, it felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. And that's what scared me the most. His voice dropped to a whisper again. So I ran. Because I don't know who I am if I'm the guy who is in love with his best friend. I don't know how to be that person. He had said it. He had finally given a name to the beautiful, terrifying thing that had been growing between us in the dark. In love. The words hung in the charged air of the car, and I felt a dizzying, disorienting wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't one-sided. He felt it too. His fear was not a rejection of me, but a rejection of a part of himself he was only just discovering. My own fear, the fear that I had misinterpreted everything, finally receded, replaced by a profound, bone-deep empathy. He was lost, and he was scared, and he had pushed away the one person who could have helped him find his way. I reached across the console, my hand covering his. His fist slowly uncurled under my touch. You don't have to know how to be that person, I said softly. We can figure it out together. Or we don't have to figure anything out at all. We just have to not run away. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Just talk to me. Don't shut me out. That's the only thing I can't handle. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He nodded, a slow, solemn movement. Okay, he whispered. Okay. I'm sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. And I did. In that moment, sitting in the quiet intimacy of my car, the parking lot lights casting long shadows around us, the fog began to lift. We were still in uncharted territory, and the path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, we were looking at the map together. The resolution wasn't a sudden sunrise, but a slow, gentle dawn. The conversation in my car didn't magically solve everything, but it cracked the foundation of the fear that had been keeping us apart. It allowed us to start building something new, something honest, on the ground we had cleared. We took it slow, relearning the rhythms of our own friendship, now infused with a new and delicate awareness. The first step was simply talking. We talked for hours that night, back at my apartment, sitting on the couch where it had all started, a safe and familiar distance between us. He told me about the panic, the identity crisis that the kiss had triggered. He spoke of the neat, straight line he had always imagined his life would follow, and the terror of realizing he was standing at a crossroads he never knew existed. I, in turn, finally confessed the truth I had guarded for so long. I told him about that rainy soccer field, about the years of quiet, hopeless affection, about the exquisite torture of our nightly ritual. I laid my own vulnerability at his feet, a matching offering to his. And in that exchange of secrets, in that mutual unveiling, we found a new kind of intimacy, one built not on ambiguity and unspoken gestures, but on the solid bedrock of truth. The physical space between us slowly began to close again, but this time, it was with intention. A few nights after our talk, while watching a movie, he hesitantly rested his head on my shoulder. It was a conscious choice, not an act of thoughtless comfort-seeking. I responded by wrapping my arm around him, pulling him closer. There was no pretense, no plausible deniability. It was a simple, declarative statement. I am here, and I want to be close to you. He still stayed over on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but the pretense was gone. He came over because he wanted to be with me. We still shared the bed, but the demilitarized zone was gone for good. We would fall asleep facing each other, his hand often finding mine in the dark. The touches were no longer accidental or born of a subconscious need for warmth. They were deliberate, questioning, and reassuring. Each one was a sentence in our new, shared language. Are you okay? Yes. Are you still here? Always. The bedroom door became a new kind of symbol. We started closing it at night. not to create a boundary, but to consecrate a space. The apartment was the world, but the bedroom was ours. The closed door wasn't a barrier keeping things out. It was a frame, defining our shared sanctuary. It was a statement of privacy and intimacy, a quiet acknowledgement that what happened within those four walls belonged only to us. It was no longer about leaving a path open for a possibility. It was about creating a home for a reality. The sliver of light was gone, replaced by a comfortable, shared darkness, a space where we were free to be vulnerable, to be uncertain, to simply be together. We found our new normal in the small, domestic moments. In making coffee together in the morning, our bodies moving around each other in the small kitchen with an easy, familiar choreography. In the way he would now instinctively reach for my hand while we were walking down the street. A small, public declaration that was more terrifying and more thrilling than any goal he had ever scored. It was in the quiet evenings spent not talking, but simply existing in the same room, me editing photos on my laptop, him reading a book, the silence between us no longer heavy with unspoken tension, but filled with a comfortable, peaceful companionship. He was still the sun, but I was no longer a distant planet. I was the Earth, grounded and steady, and he was orbiting me just as much as I was orbiting him. We had found our equilibrium. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the soft sound of him moving around the apartment. I found him in the living room, standing by the window, a mug in his hand, looking out at the city coming to life. The morning light streamed in, catching the gold in his hair, the same way the street lamp had all those months ago when he had fallen asleep in my lap. He turned as I approached, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was a smile I had seen 1,000 times, but this one was different. It was free of the shadows of anxiety and confusion that had haunted him for so long. It was pure and open and meant entirely for me. "Morning," he said, his voice soft. "Morning," I replied, coming to stand beside him. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his free arm around my waist, pulling me into his warmth. We stood there for a long time, watching the world wake up, two separate people who had finally, painstakingly, built a shared world of their own. The journey had been a quiet, terrifying, and beautiful one, navigated through a minefield of unspoken feelings and ambiguous gestures. We had started as teammates, then became friends, then something undefined and fragile. But now, standing here in the quiet light of a new day, I knew what we were. We were a safe harbor. We were a closed door. We were the answer to a question we had both been too afraid to ask for far too long. We were just us. And it was more than enough. It was everything. We had learned that the most profound changes don't happen in the thunder, but in the quiet moments that follow. They happen when you stop running, when you turn to face the person beside you, and you finally learn to speak the truth. And we began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together.